I suppose when we're talking about hormones, we're talking about the chemistry of the body. Now, the human body is like an amazing factory, and it makes a lot of chemicals, and those chemicals will determine everything about the way we function. Excuse me, I just got to get this voice clear. Might need a drink of water. Someone could grab me one from down the back there. Yeah, the chemicals mostly are made in the endocrine system. Now, how many people have heard of that, the endocrine system? So you know what I'm talking about. It's a system of glands, large glands, that are found throughout the body, and these glands produce various hormones, and these hormones are made in varying amounts. Some of these hormones are made like in 1 drop or a half a drop per day, but if there's a shortage or too much of those hormones, well then we throw our body right out of balance. So the exactness, the precision of the endocrine system is very, very important. In fact, last night I said that the nervous system, or the central nervous system, is the most important system in the body because it's the first part that's formed when we're in the embryo, and it's the brain and the tail that goes down through the spine and feeds out nerves to the whole body. But the second most important system in the body, I believe, is the endocrine system, because if those chemicals are out of balance, oh, thank you. Thanks. If the endocrine system's out of balance, then the whole system will go. Now, here's a chart showing some of the endocrine glands. We've got, up in the head, you've got the pineal gland, which is responsible for a number of hormones, but the most common one that is known is the hormone called melatonin. Now, has anyone heard of melatonin? The melatonin is the hormone that helps you what? Sleep. It helps you to sleep. And it's made when we're in darkness, particularly between the hours of sunset and midnight. If we get darkness between those hours, we make quite a lot of melatonin. If we don't get darkness between those hours, we don't make a lot of melatonin, and so we don't get good sleep. And melatonin has been implicated now in a lot of preventative cancer. Melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant that we make within our own bodies. And studies are proving now that it's a tremendous hormone to have for cancer prevention. So people who don't get enough sleep before midnight are more prone to cancer. That's a fact. Now, then there's the pituitary gland, which is called the master gland, which is up in the brain, and it makes about 9 different hormones. It's got 2 parts, and we'll go into that in a little while, about the pituitary. Then there's the thyroid up in the throat. There's the thymus here in the chest. We've got the adrenals on top of the kidneys. There's the pancreas, or part of the pancreas is called endocrine because it makes hormone. It makes the hormone called insulin. And then we've got the stomach is actually part of the endocrine system because it produces a hormone called secretin, which we can talk about further on. Then there's the reproductive organs, like the ovaries, the testes and the prostate. I mentioned last night about the adenoids that they used to believe were just totally part of the lymphatic system, but they are the adenoids are part of the pituitary system, and so they're part of the endocrine system too. And they're involved in the production of growth hormone in the first 5 years of your life. Now, we'll have a closer look at some of these. The hormones actually determine your growth and your weight and size. They'll determine your tolerance to hot and cold temperatures, and your emotional stability, your sex drive, your sleep, your energy levels, your ability to heal, and a lot more. So they're incredibly important. So when we talk about hormones, a lot of people think we're only talking about reproductive hormones. But hormones are all the chemicals that are made in these glands that balance each other out to produce balance in the life. Now the pituitary gland, there's a closer picture of it you can see up there. It's got two sections, the anterior, which is the front, and the posterior, which is the rear. And the anterior produces 6 to 7 hormones, and the posterior produces 2. And these hormones seem to have an effect on the rest of the endocrine glands. We've got the hypothalamus. Now you can see on that picture up there, if I can point to it with this, I don't know if you can see that red mark, but these little things here, they're actually part of the hypothalamus. Now the hypothalamus will detect whether there's too much of a certain hormone or too little of a certain hormone in the system. And if it detects that there's not enough of, say, thyroid hormone, it will then send a signal down to the pituitary gland via another hormone. It produces a hormone that stimulates the pituitary gland, basically like getting on the telephone and saying, "Pituitary, did you know that thyroid is not making enough thyroxine at the moment? You better do something." So pituitary says, "Fine." So pituitary then produces a stimulating hormone to stimulate the thyroid gland to try and make it produce more thyroid hormone. And that's the way a lot of the system works. It's a negative feedback system. Now, the thyroid itself is responsible for a lot of different functions in the body. The production of heat, protein synthesis, lipid synthesis, that's the digestion of and the assimilation of fats and proteins and carbohydrates. It also is important in regulating estrogen and insulin levels. So when we find women, for example, that have got a breast cancer, and the breast cancer is fed by estrogen, we really need to go back to the thyroid and look at thyroid function, because if thyroid is down, then estrogen comes up and insulin comes up. And we're going to look at that further on tonight. It's also important for the production of some of the enzymes and vitamins that are catalysts in the body. So thyroid is really important. It's around the throat, and we find a lot of people today get their thyroid out. The thyroid makes 9 different hormones. Now, the most important of them is called T4, and T4 will really convert into T3, and T3 will control your metabolism, and it'll determine whether you put on weight or whether you lose weight. We actually had a man come to us some years ago who was thin like me, and he told me how he'd always been quite thin until he had some dental work done, and the dental work apparently affected his thyroid gland, and he just started putting on weight, and he got bigger and bigger and bigger, and within 3 months he was very obese. He was going to doctors trying to work out what was going on. In the end, there was a lot of tests done, and they found that he was not producing T3 in the thyroid. He wasn't converting T4 into T3. So he started taking a T3 supplement, and he got really thin again within 3 months. So just one hormone missing could make a huge difference. But T3 is the most important one in keeping the metabolism in check. Now, you find if someone gets their thyroid taken out, they usually get put on T4, and then the body converts that to T3 somehow, and we don't put a lot of emphasis on the other ones, the other T1, 2, and 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. But really, to have a balanced metabolism and a balanced hormonal system, we need to have all 9 of them. But the adrenals, which are down on top of the kidneys, they produce over 30 different hormones. Now, we've got the cortex and the medulla, 2 different parts of this gland. It produces what's called the mother of hormones, which is called DHEA. Now, DHEA is able to change its form. So if a woman, for example, had her ovaries taken out and she couldn't produce enough estrogen, if you can get the adrenal glands healthy enough, they then can convert DHEA into estrogen. So we've seen a lot of ladies that have lost their ovaries, and through practicing lifestyle reforms and working on getting those adrenal glands healthy by using vitamin B, B5 and B6 particularly, and herbs like ginseng and licorice root, a Chinese herb called Romania, we've been able to get them producing all the estrogen that they need. And it comes from the adrenals, it comes from the DHEA. The adrenals also produce a hormone called cortisol. Now, we produce cortisol during the daytime, not during the night, because cortisol slows down the immune system. It suppresses the immune system so that we can use our energy rather than for healing, we use it to do things. But in the evening, when we start making melatonin, we stop making cortisol. So the melatonin speeds up our immune system so we heal better at night. Now, there's a lot of things that can actually increase the cortisol levels. Stress, for example. If you're under a lot of stress, you make a lot more cortisol. It suppresses digestion, it suppresses the immune system, and it can create a disease problem. That's why people under a lot of stress usually get sick. Coffee, which we mentioned last night, also causes the adrenals to be stimulated to produce more cortisol, which then suppresses the immune system and affects digestion. So the adrenals also produce adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is the fight or flight hormone, so if you get a big fright or a scare, you get that superhuman strength. In fact, I heard a story about a man over in South Africa who had caught the train on one evening home. It had been raining. He got off the train in Johannesburg, somewhere in the country, just outside Johannesburg, and he usually went through the cemetery to get home. But it had been raining and it was awful muddy, and he knew it would take him an extra half an hour to walk around, so he decided to go for it anyway. And he's plodding along through all this mud through the cemetery, and then bang, straight down a very deep hole that had been dug that day for a funeral the next day. Well, he got such a fright, and he was jumping up and sliding back down through all the mud, and in the end he just gave up. He sat down, he came to terms with it. He was a smoker, and he thought, well, I'll just have a cigarette and wait till the morning. So he pulled out his cigarettes, but he didn't have a match. So he thought, I'll just have to stay here and sleep till the people come along in the morning and get me out. Well, about an hour later, he heard another train pull in, and then he could hear someone whistling. So this man was actually following his footsteps, and he was a bit scared, so he was whistling, and the next thing, bang, there he is down the hole with him. So he jumped and he screamed and he jumped and he kept sliding back down, and in the end he just sat down. And then the other man said to him, "G'day, mate, you got a match?" Anyway, the guy was gone. See, so that's adrenaline, superhuman strength, straight out. And if you get a big scare, a big fright, you can get that superhuman strength, and that comes from the adrenals. So if your adrenals are fatigued, you often find people who drink a lot of coffee, when they get into that fight or flight situation, they just don't get the adrenaline because they've burnt their adrenals out. They just don't have the ability to produce the amount of adrenaline they need. And so people also who are under stress all the time because they're producing small amounts of adrenaline all the time, actually burning themselves out. It's a high octane fuel. And so we need to watch our stress levels, and we need to keep away from the stimulants such as caffeine, coffee and tea. Tobacco is another stimulant. Alcohol can be a stimulant. There's a lot of stimulants out there that can do a lot of damage to this gland. The adrenal glands can do a tremendous lot of covering damage to other glands. If other glands aren't working properly, the adrenals are usually the ones that step in and take over. Now, all these glands work on negative feedback, like I was saying before. If you've got a low T4, hypothalamus secretes a hormone which stimulates pituitary to secrete thyroid-stimulating hormone, and that's the way they all work. So I've just put that up there so you can remember that. Now, these glands are fed on minerals. The food for these glands is trace elements. And the problem is that today, we talked last night about agriculture, there's not enough trace minerals in the soil in most of the agriculture that's done in this country anymore. We've farmed out the land. We've just kept farming out the same land over and over again. And we put back certain minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, NPK, but we don't put back a lot of the other minerals like selenium and beryllium and germanium and boron and so on. A lot of the trace elements that are essential for good health. Now, there's not a lot of real good studies that have been done on a lot of these trace minerals. And so we get reports like on hair analyses, and it'll show someone's very low on, say, boron or beryllium or germanium. But then we look up the studies on it, it just says, well, it's believed that these are essential for good health, but no studies have been done to show what they actually do. It's believed that most of these trace elements really enhance the endocrine system. Right? They feed it. The thyroid, for example, we know needs iodine. Studies have proved that over and over again. It needs iodine plus a number of other trace elements, but iodine is the most important for the thyroid. If we're not getting enough iodine in our diet, what happens? We start to get thyroid dysfunction. The pancreas needs chromium and vanadium, and if we're not getting enough chromium and vanadium in our diet, we will get pancreatic problems, which can lead to diabetes or digestive problems, problems with producing enzymes. Our insulin levels can get messed up just by not eating enough chromium and vanadium. And the ovaries and the testes and the prostate all need zinc and copper. And if we're not getting the right amounts of zinc and copper, and it should be at a ratio of about 4 to 1, 4 times zinc to 1 part copper in our diet, then we're going to get problems with the prostate, we'll get problems with the ovaries, problems with reproduction. The adrenals need a huge amount of potassium, but they also need a lot of other trace elements as well. And I could go through all the endocrine systems. We're not sure which ones need which trace minerals, but we know that if trace minerals are low in the system, then we stop producing the right amount of hormones. The thymus gland, which is found here in the chest, is a very important one for the immune system. When you're born, the thymus gland is about the size of the heart. But as we get older, the thymus gland starts programming the immune system. So as a little baby has got a very big thymus gland, and as they get exposed to various toxins and pathogens and bacteria and so on, their thymus gland programs the immune system on how to deal with these things. So by the time a child is about 5 years old, they've been exposed to most things. And so the thymus gland starts to shrink up. By the time we're an adult, it's about the size of a pea, because we've been exposed to most things and the immune system has been programmed. Now, you'll find that if we're producing too much cortisol through stress and through taking stimulants, well then that actually has a suppressive effect on the thymus gland as well. So they all interrelate to each other. We'll move on. Soil deficiencies today is the biggest problem, because in New Zealand there was a pine plantation where the government had planted a huge big area with pine trees, and after about a year they were about this big, but the scientists came in and they looked at the wood and they said these trees are not going to be any good for straight timber. They'll only be good for chipboard because there's something missing in the soil, because the trees are already starting to buckle, they're already starting to have problems in the growth. And they brought a team of soil analysts into the area and they checked out the soil for quite a few square miles, and they found that entire area was deficient in copper. It didn't have any copper really at all. Then they found in their travels that the local deer farms had a big problem with their deer. The deer actually had arthritis, and the deer had been suffering from arthritis for years, and these farmers didn't know how to deal with it. So they brought in copper salts and they fertilised the entire area with copper salts over a period of time. And within 12 months, the trees had actually recovered and the timber was straight again, and they knew then that timber was going to be okay for straight timber when it was fully grown. The interesting thing too was that the deer farmers all reported that within 12 months there wasn't one case of arthritis in any herd. Now, have you ever seen people wear those copper bracelets for arthritis? Do you know why they work? They work in a lot of cases. If there is a copper deficiency involved with the arthritis, the copper bracelet you find that the oils in the skin actually start breaking down the copper and adding an enzyme from your body to the copper, which creates an organic form of copper. And that organic form of copper is then absorbed into the skin and transported through the body and actually deals with the copper deficiency. So those copper bracelets are actually quite a good thing for people with arthritis. Has anyone ever tried them here? No. Has anyone ever had arthritis? Some people. Well, you might want to try that. But there's other ways to go. That's only one part of the problem. In Western Australia, there was a wheat crop. It was planted by a big insurance company. They bought a very big parcel of land, they fertilised it, and they ploughed it all up and treated the soil the best they knew, and then they planted their wheat. Well, the wheat was only growing about that high. So they got some scientists in, they looked at the soil, and the soil had no vanadium, one mineral. Now, we need only 0.03 parts per million of vanadium in our diet, but if we don't get that, we end up with pancreatic problems. Vanadium is found mostly in our grain foods. It's also found in trace amounts in our vegetables. But this area of Western Australia didn't have any. So they brought in 1 ounce of pure vanadium diluted to every 1,000 acres as a fertiliser, and they ended up with one of the biggest wheat crops in the history of Western Australia, worked on bushels per acre. They had a much better yield. And that woke a lot of Western Australians up to using vanadium in their soil treatments. Has anyone heard of the Goiter Belt over in Nebraska in America? There's an area in America called the Goiter Belt. It's in the middle of America, and it's an area where they don't have any, they're not on the coastline, so they're not getting any influence from the sea. So there's no iodine in the soil. Now, years ago, the population in that Goiter Belt had a huge percentage of them had goiter. Now, goiter is an inflamed, swollen thyroid, so they had a big lump in the neck. And anyway, the scientists came in and the doctors, and they worked out the problem was simply the soil. The food that was growing in that area was deficient in iodine. The people were not getting iodine in their diet, and their thyroids were becoming inflamed, and they were trying to get bigger to work harder so that they could make the hormones, because they didn't have the raw material to make the hormones they needed to make. And so they become inflamed. These are just some examples of what deficiency in one trace element can do to the soil. Now, the soil is very similar to the human blood. You find that if we treated the human body the way we treat soil in organic farming, we'd have a lot of healthy people. And you find that a lot of vets know this. And I've talked to a number of vets who said that they know how to get animals well, they just give them trace minerals. You've heard about people giving them the molasses blocks, molasses licks they call them, to the animals. And these are usually a block made from molasses and a whole lot of trace minerals, including copper and zinc, boron. They usually put in beryllium and germanium and a whole lot of other trace elements. And the animals lick these and they maintain good health. But today, if we get sick, rather than being given a molasses lick, we're just given drugs to try and suppress the symptoms. And I mean, the number of cases I've come across with thyroid disease where the doctors have simply put them on a drug and then that hasn't worked too well, so they've taken out the thyroid gland, when we know that simply all that person needed was a few trace minerals, particularly iodine. And we've needed to just look at balancing the body with some trace elements. It's a sad thing. Rather than dictate to the body by dictating with drugs or surgery, we need to investigate the body and work out what the body's trying to do, because the body is made by design. It's made by design to win. And if it's got problems, then we've got to become Sherlock Holmes and try and work out why it's got those problems and start feeding it the nutrients that it needs and giving it the exercise and the sunlight and the fresh air and the water and so on that it needs to recover, rather than dictating to it with drugs. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, so this use of NPK in farming today is a big problem, because NPK is basically an unnatural fertiliser that's being put into the soil because they know that it produces good-looking foliage. But the average cabbage that you buy down at the store today is deficient in anything up to 40 trace elements, maybe even more than that. But They look good because they've got the nitrogen, they've got the phosphorus and the potassium, and it makes them look good. Have you ever heard of the Pharisees in the Bible? You know, they talked about they used to look good. They wore all the nice clothes on the outside, but the Bible says that they were rotten on the inside, in the heart. And you find that plants that have been grown in soil that is mineral deficient and have been given nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, they look really good, but they haven't got the nutrients you need. And if you're living on those sort of foods all the time, then you will become mineral deficient. You'll become nutrient deficient and you'll end up having disease problems as a result. So we need to look at getting trace minerals. And one of the main things that we do at Living Valley Springs is teach people how to get their trace elements. Now, some of the sources that we can get them from, good salts like Celtic salt. There's a little bit of a question on Celtic salt at the moment, and I'm just about to get some tests done on it to see if it's free from mercury. But some dentists are saying that the Celtic salt, because it comes from the sea, may have mercury levels. The salt we're using at Living Valley Springs now is called salt of the earth. It comes from Mauritius, and it comes in a blue and white pack. You can get it in the health food stores around here, and it's fairly white. It's clean. It's not as dark as the old Celtic salt. And in Mauritius, the sea water comes into big basalt bays, and they dehydrate it, and then they harvest it with the salt with wooden harvesters. So it's done quite cleanly, and that salt is claimed to have a lower level of sodium and a higher level of magnesium. And I'm about to get it tested to find out what the mercury levels are, but they may be quite low. But we do need some salt. A little bit of salt is essential for digestion. And people that go on a salt-free diet, you find they end up getting a lot of problems. We do need some salt. We don't need a huge amount of it, but if you can use some of the good natural salts that have just been made from the dehydrated ocean water or rock salt, and a little bit in your food, you'll find that it will give you a better digestion because it helps the stomach manufacture hydrochloric acid. Another place we can get our minerals is from organic produce that has been grown in soil where the farmers know what they're doing, where they've been putting the trace elements back in, where they're giving the soil a rest every 7th year, where they're actually not growing the same crops in the same area every time. They might grow a leafy crop one season, the next season they put in a root crop, and the next season they put in a vine crop. But if they keep growing a leafy crop season after season, they totally deplete the soil of certain minerals. It's interesting, has anyone heard of the herb called golden seal? It grows in New York. It takes 7 years to mature, and that's why it's so expensive. But once golden seal has been harvested, they can't use that soil for 7 more years because it takes all the nutrient out of the soil. And that's why it's such a powerful herb. It's got just about every nutrient known to man in golden seal. So it's a tremendous herb for nutritional problems. It also aids digestion. It's very good as a natural form of antibiotic. It stimulates the liver. It's good for the gallbladder. It's good for the intestines. But it's because it's so rich in trace minerals. And foods that are rich in trace elements are the key to longevity and wellness. You know, so if you get one thing tonight to take away with you, and we're talking about hormones, if you want to get the system healthy, you need to get the endocrine system healthy. To get the endocrine system healthy and to make the right hormones, you need the trace minerals. And you need to be looking at your food you're eating. Don't eat food that's been devitalised. Do you know what I mean by that? White bread. Do you know a loaf of white bread, you can get it and squash it in. How much nutrient is in it? All of the good stuff's been taken out. For example, the bran has been sent off somewhere, the wheat germ's gone somewhere else, the gluten has gone somewhere else. They take wheat oil out of it, and they end up with this depleted, devitalised flour. Now, when you get a loaf of white bread, if you eat it, it will come out as a waste product, more nutritious than when you first ate it, because it actually is like a sponge, and it will draw nutrient out of your body, and it will give you deficiencies. So if you're eating a depleted diet and you're nutritionally deficient to start with, and you're eating a lot of devitalised processed food, you'll find that will actually make you worse. And I can prove it because, has anyone here heard of a white bread poultice? Did Grandma ever use one? You know, in the old days, If you had a boil on the leg, Grandma would get a loaf of white bread, make it wet, pack it on the boil, wrap it up, and it would draw all the pus out of the boil. It was the best thing you could do. Now, it had to be white bread. Wholemeal bread never worked, right? Because wholemeal bread doesn't draw. It's not a sponge. And so if we're eating white bread and white sugar and margarine is one of the most toxic, poisonous, so-called foods that's probably ever ended up in anyone's refrigerator or on their dining table. Margarine is made by reacting nickel with rancid oil at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It becomes a hydrogenated fat. The nickel is a catalyst. It gives a hydrogen atom to each molecule of the fat, and it makes the fat very difficult to break down in the body. And we find that hydrogenated fats are responsible for cancer, they're responsible for heart diseases and many other diseases. And many years ago I went to a lecture by Dr. Shute from the Shute Heart Foundation. That was down in Sydney. And he was showing his research on margarine. And on his screen he had slides, 40,000 magnification of blood cells. And he was showing a person's blood, healthy blood, and then he gave them margarine to eat, and then he took another sample of their blood and he showed what was going on. And the white blood cells were just bursting open and spilling their contents into the blood. He found also the red blood cells were sticking together. The white blood cells were trying to attack the margarine molecules but losing. And it took several hours for the body to go through this war. And then the body got over it. We have about 50 billion white blood cells in the bone marrow on reserve at any one time. So it's no big deal. The body just brings out more white blood cells and we get on with life. But we don't realise that the body's just gone through a huge battle to keep us alive. Because we're eating something that's made in a factory by man, by reacting fats with metals. It's just the wrong thing to do. And studies have shown now that as the consumption of margarine has increased, heart disease has increased proportionately. And there was a book I've got, it's actually called Margarine, the Plastic Fat and Your Heart Attack. And that was a book that was written showing the effort that was made by a whole lot of scientists and doctors in America to get margarine banned in the United States some years ago. They produced all of the facts, and the book has got all the letters, copies of letters that went to and from government departments. But eventually the government just squashed it. They just said it's too big an industry, it's in everything. We let people smoke, why wouldn't we let them eat margarine? But in actual fact, people who eat margarine regularly, it affects their health greater than people who smoke regularly in the long term. So, and it's out there, it's on all the shelves. You see that butter is getting less and less. As you go to the supermarket, you don't see butter in the quantities it used to be. So you find that butter is not that bad. Butter is a natural product. The body knows how to deal with it. We've done our own tests at Living Valley Springs. We do blood samples. We've taken blood out of people. I made a slide before and after the consumption of margarine, before and after the consumption of butter. We don't see any change in the blood after consuming butter. We don't see the red blood cells don't stick together. We don't see any change in the white blood cell activity at all. But with margarine, we do. So that's another thing that will affect your minerals as well, because your body has to deal with it. And in dealing with it, you're going to deplete the system of minerals, of the good trace minerals. And it's also, a lot of margarines have cadmium in them. And the cadmium uses up a lot of your other good trace minerals. The body uses them as antioxidants to try and deal with the cadmium. Oh, I need to go back one there. Yeah, supplements is another way, because supplementation today, a lot of people say, well, why should we need to supplement? Can't we just get our nutrients from our food? Do you know that I mentioned this last night, but in 1942, the study done by the New Jersey, where every year they get foods from across America and they analyse their nutritional values, and they record them and they compare them. Now, in the year 2002, the study showed that the nutrient levels in food right across the board was an average of 62% less than what it was in 1942. Right, so in the last 60 years, the nutrient levels in our food have gone down on an average of 62%. Right, so we wonder why there's so much cancer and so much disease in our community. but we're farming out the soil, we're polluting the atmosphere, we're using all these man-made things like margarine and so on, we're eating a lot more refined, processed junk food. It's no wonder. There needs to be something done about it. We need to start up a revolution and try and get organic farming and get the nutrients back into the soil. In fact, I recommend people when they go home from Living Valley Springs to start up their own garden, to go and get a book on organic gardening and learn how to do it. In a little area in your backyard, you can produce enough food to keep a whole family if you know how to do it properly. You need to rotate your crops, and you need to be constantly producing seedlings and putting them into the soil and so on. But you can put all those good nutrients back into your soil. One of the ways of doing it is getting rock dust. You can buy big bags of rock dust, which is just made from ground up basalt and granite, and put that into your soil. And as it breaks down, it's a powdered rock. It breaks down, it puts all the minerals back into the soil. You need to put in mulch and compost, and it's a good idea to get the soil tested and see what is missing. Right? But if you're really interested in longevity and wellness, it's a good idea to start looking at growing some of your own food. How many people here actually grow some of your own food? Oh, that's tremendous. Yeah, that's good. Very good to hear. Now, I want to talk about cholesterol, because cholesterol is another major factor in the action of hormones. Cholesterol's probably got a little bit of a bad name, but do you know it's one of the most important chemicals in the human body? It's produced mostly in the liver, and cholesterol, there's various forms of cholesterol. There's a high density, there's low density, there's very low density, and there's a number of other grades in between. But the high density cholesterol is a tremendously important product in the body, and so is the low density cholesterol. We often hear them called good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Well, the body wouldn't make something that's bad, so unless you're feeding it all the wrong stuff. But the low density cholesterol is very important as well. And the low density cholesterol works as a filler to putty up cracks in the arteries. Like if we've got a vitamin C deficiency and we start getting cracks in our arteries and veins, well, the low density cholesterol will come and seal them up. High density cholesterol is an incredibly protective substance, and it protects us from fat-soluble poisons. In fact, we'll have a look at on this in a minute on the board up here at a number of the things cholesterol does. But a lot of people worry about cholesterol. It might cause heart trouble. Do you know, if you really want to get a check on your heart and your cardiovascular system, get the doctor to do a test for homocysteine. Homocysteine is an amino acid produced in the heart, and that will give you a very accurate picture of where you're at. The range should be somewhere between 5 and 15. Someone my age, I probably should have a level of about 10 or 11. But if it's high, then you know there's a cardiovascular problem. But cholesterol does not necessarily mean that. You can have a high cholesterol level and it does not mean you've got a problem, because the body might be raising your cholesterol to protect you from a fat-soluble toxin that's in your system, such as mercury. If you've got fillings in the teeth, then you need a higher level of cholesterol. Now, the normal range for cholesterol on a medical report, like on a pathology report, is 3.6 to 6.5. The optimum range, however, is more like 4.7 to 5.5. Right, now, if you've got fillings in your teeth, your optimum range is 5.2 to 6.2, or even up to 6.5, just depending. So rather than take statins to bring down a high level of cholesterol, you really need to find out why your cholesterol is high first. Now, cholesterol transports fat-soluble antioxidants through the body. So if we're taking antioxidants and we've got a low level of cholesterol, we can just poison ourselves with too much antioxidants, because we're not giving, we don't have the cholesterol to transport them. It also eliminates fat-soluble poisons such as mercury and lead and other ones. It repairs nerve tissue and it protects the arteries, and it assists in the production of hormones, which is what we're talking about tonight. Now, cholesterol is essential in the production of hormones, and we find that ladies with very low cholesterol levels are the ones that get into big trouble with their hormones. Right, ladies that have got a higher level of cholesterol, you find that their hormones are usually much more in balance. Now, it's a formula that you can memorise, is minerals plus cholesterol equals hormones. That's not in the case of every hormone, but in a lot of the hormones in the body, it's trace elements, particular ones, synthesised with cholesterol in the endocrine glands, produces the hormones we need. If we're short on trace minerals or if we're short on cholesterol, we're going to have trouble with our hormones. Understand? That makes sense? Now, before I go on, I just want to use the board over here. Will I bring the board up here? Yeah. Do you want to help me, Johnny? How's that, Cuba? Yeah, what did I do with the colours? Thanks. Okay, now I'll talk about ladies' hormones to start with. The female reproductive system, we produce a number of different hormones. The first one that we start producing at the beginning of a month is estrogen. And the estrogen level goes up toward the middle of the month, and around the middle of the month it starts to drop off. That's that black line. And estrogen is really important for getting the ovaries ready to secrete an egg. So they prepare the ovaries, they create a cyst in the ovary, and you might have a whole lot of eggs in your ovary. In fact, I think when you're born, all the eggs that you're ever going to have are already there. But each month, your ovaries take it in turns. 1 month it's the left ovary, the next month it's the right ovary. But the estrogen creates a cyst, and then one of the eggs says it's my turn and hops up into the cyst, and then the cyst bursts around the middle of the month, and the little egg pops out and gets picked up by the fallopian tube and taken down into the fallopian tube where it waits to be fertilised. Right, now, around that time, estrogen is not needed so much anymore, so it drops away a little bit. Progesterone is the other hormone. It runs along till about the middle of the month, and then once estrogen starts to drop, progesterone starts to go up. Now, progesterone is the hormone that prepares the body for conception. It prepares the womb to start forming an embryo. It also increases the sex drive. It increases lubrication. It increases all the production of pheromones that are the attractants that are like a scent that a woman tends to give off. It's not a scent that the men pick up with their nose, but they actually pick it up through their own hormone receptors. And so in this part of the month, women are producing attractants to attract their husband. They're also producing lubricant, their sex drive increases, and they're getting ready to conceive. Right, now, if they don't conceive, then the progesterone drops back down again and we start the cycle all over again. One of the problems today is that the estrogen levels in a lot of women are low, and you find that they'll come up and then they'll come down here. And that's because there's a mineral deficiency in the food like we're talking about, and it's also from exposure to what we call xenoestrogens, which are chemicals. Even aluminium has now been classed as a xenoestrogen. They're chemicals that mimic estrogen, and the body thinks it's got enough estrogen, so it doesn't make the right amount that we need. And we get these from petrochemicals and plastics and exposure to various poisons and toxins in the atmosphere. Right, so we find a lot of women aren't producing enough estrogen, but then the progesterone, we find with a lot of ladies, I'll draw a line like this, it starts to go up and then it'll often take a nosedive. Now the problem is that at this time of the month, the estrogen needs to be lower than the progesterone. And if the estrogen is higher than the progesterone, the excessive estrogen becomes toxic. So the area that we have in here creates a major problem. We've got a time in the month when our progesterone is lower than our estrogen. The estrogen becomes quite toxic to us, and it develops all sorts of problems, like premenstrual stress. It creates cystic problems, fibroid problems, gallbladder problems, emotional problems, and a whole range of other serious conditions. And how do we fix it? Well, I like to try and fix it naturally without... I mean, there's hormone creams available like progesterone cream, which will fix it fairly quickly. But if we can get the body healthy and get the right trace minerals back into the body, using herbs and using trace elements and so on, we can actually correct this. But it takes a lot of cooperation from people. Now, over in America, it's quite legal to use hormones. I don't like using hormones too much because we're still dictating to the body. However, it can be a good thing to use them for a short period of time to try and kick the system back in again. But it still is dictating to the body because you're actually putting some hormone cream on the body, which is getting absorbed in, and you're really saying to the body, this is what you should be producing, I'm giving it to you. Right? But we really need to stimulate the body itself so it will start producing the right hormones. If it can't do that, then we need to resort to progesterone cream, and I don't like using it for a long period of time unless somebody has had a hysterectomy and they've had their ovaries taken out and they can't produce it anyway. Then we might need to go on to a hormone cream for the rest of their life. But it can be fixed just by simply eating the right foods and getting the right nutrients into the system. Now, another area I wanted to discuss was how these hormones balance with each other. There was a doctor named Dr. Melvin Page. Now, Melvin Page studied the endocrine system for many, many years, and he got lots of subjects to come in and give samples of saliva and urine and blood and so on, and he was trying to work out the problems that are created by hormonal imbalances. And he found that if the thyroid hormone balance was out, then it created a domino effect right across the board. Right? In actual fact, I've come to the conclusion now that I think that insulin is probably one of the most, if not the most important hormone in the system, because insulin controls our blood sugars, and it's also very important in the digestive system. And if insulin is out, thyroid's out, and that creates this domino effect across the board. Now, he found that if thyroid is low, now we call this the midline here, I'll just give it a big NML, the midline, really our hormones should be right across this midline. And I've only just got a few there as an example, but we've got a lot of hormones right across the board. Now, if thyroid is low, insulin is going to come up. Right? So if insulin comes up, estrogen also comes up. And if estrogen comes up, testosterone comes down, and pituitary then increases to try and stimulate and correct this problem at the expense of adrenal hormone. Right? And then that creates another problem, which creates another problem, and we get problems right across the board. Now, the thing is that we take a scenario, a typical patient who's got low thyroid, so their metabolism is very slow, so they tend to put on weight. And they can't lose weight, and they don't eat a lot of food, and they still can't lose weight. And I've known some ladies that have actually stopped eating food, and they still don't lose weight, because their thyroid is just not working properly. And as a result of the thyroid not working properly, their insulin is high, which is giving them sugar cravings, because insulin eats up the sugar. And if you've got too much insulin, then you'll get cravings for sugar foods, carbohydrates, right? The cakes, the biscuits, the ice cream, the Coke, and the sugary things, right? And so you find that this poor person who's got a slow metabolism because the thyroid's not working properly is also starving for carbs, is going to make them even fatter. Right? Now, that's going to create a problem with the estrogen. So the high estrogen is going to create a whole lot more problems. It will tend to put on fat as well, and it will affect their sex drive, because low testosterone, they won't have a very high sex drive, and because their pituitary's kicked in and the adrenals are down, they'll have low energy levels. And so this poor person is overweight, they've got sugar cravings, they're eating all the wrong food, they've got no sex drive, and they've got no energy. And we see people with that scenario all the time, don't we? Coming to Living Valley Springs. And they're coming there because they want to do some fasting, they want to lose some weight, but that's not necessarily the answer. It is important to do a cleanse. With most problems, we find an initial cleansing of the system and cleaning up the liver is extremely important. So we incorporate that into most of our treatments. But then we've got to go into this endocrine system and work out the problem and deal with the endocrine glands and bring them back into balance. Dr. Page went a lot further with this. He found that people with the low thyroid, with the domino effect, ended up, on one side of the line, basically, and people up on the other side ended up with the domino effect the other way. And he said that he started looking at physical attributes of the people on either side. And he found that there was actually a whole lot of different physical attributes, so he could tell after a while, without even doing the blood tests, which side of the fence people were on. I won't go into that right now, but that's really a bit of a introduction, I suppose, into hormones. Now, John is going to talk to you after we have a short break, and he's going to talk about body chemistry from the area of the pH. And pH is also dependent on the minerals. And you're going to see that if the hormones are out and the pH is out, you find that we've got a problem with acidosis, and that needs to be dealt with as well. But John's going to cover that with you. So we'll just have a short break now. But before we do have a short break, I had a list of things here that people have been asking about last night. Just bring that little box up for me, John. Some of the things that we've got out there, people were asking, what are they for? And I didn't get to tell anybody last night what they were for. One thing a lot of people were asking about was this, these little capsules. Yeah. Okay. These are called life capsules, and these are produced by an old Italian lady down in Sydney. She's a herbalist, and they're made from aloes. They get the whole aloe plant, and they dry it, and then they grind it up, powder it up, and they mix it with a little bit of myrrh and some ginger. And she's been using these for about 30 years in her clinic in Darlinghurst to treat people with constipation. They basically stimulate the peristatic muscles to make them work. And we find that with a lot of treatments for constipation, they still keep the bowel lazy. They will go in and sweep the bowel out, but the bowel's still lazy. And what these do is that they actually make the muscles in the colon contract. And so when you first start taking them, you sort of get some contractions and that happening in there, but it's actually training the muscles to work again. So people that have got a problem with slow bowels, you really start taking 2 of these in the night, and the next morning don't go too far from the home, just in case. But we find with a lot of people they need more than that, and you need to become your own doctor with the dosage. You might need 4 of them. You might need 2 in the night and 2 in the morning. I wouldn't take more than 2 at night because they do actually give you energy and they could keep you awake. But 2 in the night, 2 in the morning. There was one girl that I was treating that had a severe constipation. She went once a week and had done that for years. And she was about in her late 30s. So I put her on 4 of these a day and it didn't do a thing. So got her up to 7 a day and it started working. So I kept her on 7 a day for about a week and then cut it down to 4 and then down to 2. And now she's taking 1 every second night and she's going to the toilet twice every day. The interesting thing is that it's changed her whole personality. She's a lot happier, she gets on much better with her husband and the children, and she just finds life a lot better. So they're a tremendous thing. Do you know, we talked last night about the colon. If the colon is slow, if it's not working properly, it's the sewer of the body. And it will congest the whole body. So it's the very first place you want to look at cleaning. If you want to do your own little cleanse at home, you go on these for about 2 weeks. Now these aren't something that you need to take forever. Usually a 2 to 3 week program on these, and that's really it. By that stage, the muscles are working. If you keep exercising a muscle, it will get strong. So then you don't need to keep helping it. It will become strong. Some other things we've got here is maca. Now maca, see, we're talking about hormones. Maca is a very good product. It's made from a plant that comes from Peru. Now over in Peru, the women, when they go through menopause, don't have any problems at all. And studies were done the Peruvian women to find out why they never got menopausal problems. And they found that they eat a plant that's like broccoli, they let it go to maturity and they eat the roots. And so that's what maca is. And we find that it's got a lot of the trace minerals in it that balance out this problem. And so we recommend this for all women going through menopause, 1 to 2 teaspoons a day. You just put it into a juice and drink it, or you can sprinkle it onto your breakfast. It's also very good for men, particularly men with a low sex drive. It will pick up the sex drive. Now, I had a call from a man recently who told me that he's about in his 50s. He just married a much younger lady. And he said, look, I've got real problems. I married this young girl and I need some help. So I sent him down some maca, and 2 days later he rang up after he started it. He said, I can't believe, he said, could it work that quick? But anyway, I've had a number of calls from him since then, and he said, yes, it's taken care of the problem. He was nutritionally deficient and it was affecting his hormones. And so this is a good natural thing to pick up the hormones. It's not a drug. It's not even processed hardly. It's just simply the organically grown root of a broccoli type plant being ground up. That's all it is. Another thing that we have is bee pollen. Bee pollen is a tremendous food, but you need to be careful. You need to test yourself to see if you've got an allergy to it. Some people do. But bee pollen actually helps you to overcome allergies. If you start out with small amounts and build up, it helps a lot of people overcome allergies to all sorts of foods. But bee pollen is produced by the flowers originally. The flowers up in trees particularly get the pollen, and then the bees go and they take the pollen, they mix it with a secretion from their legs, and they put it in little buckets on the back of their legs, and they take it back to their hives. Now the thing with bee pollen is that, particularly with trees, they've got deep root systems, and they're bringing trace elements from right deep in the ground up to the flowers. And the bees are collecting all this mineral-rich pollen and mixing it with a secretion that's also very healthy. And so bee pollen helps produce good friendly bacteria because of the bee secretion. Good bacteria in the gut. It's a high-energy food. You never want to eat it at night. It'll keep you awake. But in the morning, it will give you a lot of energy to keep you going through the day. So it's a good thing to put a teaspoon or 2 on your breakfast every day. Absolutely. It's very good for children. It's a good way to get trace elements. It's just another way to find those missing minerals. And another thing we have is living greens, which is a combination of alfalfa grass, wheatgrass and barley grass that's been organically grown down in Victoria. We get that grown for us and sent up to us, and we pack it. And we find that's a tremendous cleanser for the blood and for the liver. It's another one of the superfoods that we use and we strongly recommend, because people don't get enough greens today, and we need a lot more chlorophyll. Do you know that chlorophyll is the blood that's found in plants? And it's very similar to the blood that's found in our bodies. So we recommend that you get as much greens as you can, and it's a good way to do it. I've got a couple of other things here. I'll just keep going. Yeah, breakfast herbs. Has anyone ever tried those? Quite a few of you. That's a combination of 7 different herbs. And we'll be talking more about that when we talk about food, because this is a tremendous way to get your trace minerals and your resins, antioxidants and so on without even taking pills. It's just in ground up herbs. We've got 7 different herbs in here, but we'll cover that another night. There's another one here, is coconut oil. Now coconut oil is a tremendous oil to eat. This is organically grown, certified organic virgin coconut oil. And coconut oil will give you a lot of the good fats that you need to help you produce the hormones and help you have the right balance of cholesterol in the body. So that's something we recommend, about a dessert spoon every day of that. We've got some vitamin B12 here that comes from America. It's the methylcobalamin, so it's quite a good form of vitamin B12. But we'd recommend that if you think you've got a vitamin B12 deficiency, check it out first before you actually get onto something like that. And just a couple of books here that Amber wanted me to show you. Well, one was that I was recommending last night called Health and Happiness. This book was written in 1905 and it's basically all about the 8 laws of health. It's a good little handbook to have. And another book that we carry is Practical Home Healing. Now this book is fantastic for knowing what to do rather than taking your children to hospitals and to doctors and so on. If your children have got a problem, it's got photos and instructions in here of what you can do basically to avoid going on to antibiotics and so on. Right, so there's a few things. We'll just have a little break for 15 minutes. You can go out and have some refreshments out there.